I'm honored to be speaking with you here today. I want to thank Marilyn Knapp for all her help, certainly Jim Reese, and all the staff that worked to make this meeting possible, and of course, the members of the Arkansas Archaeological Society that are joining us today or may view this at some time in the future. I thank you all. My name is Eric Mills. As Jim said, I'm an archaeologist and the Section 106 program manager for the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program, or AHPP, in the Division of Arkansas Heritage, a division of the Arkansas Department of Parks, Heritage, and Tourism. So that's where we live in the web of the state bureaucracy. And our program fills an important role in the regulatory process. We speak and write on behalf of the people of the state of Arkansas and all of those with an interest in cultural resources in the state. Now, in the course of that work, we exercise a great deal of influence as a consulting party on the archaeological record, how we interpret that record, the significance or insignificance of sites, and how to best protect, avoid, or otherwise consider effects a federal project may have on historic properties. What we don't do, it's a common misunderstanding, but what we don't do is provide clearance for projects. We provide an opinion, we provide recommendations and requests. So in addition to sitting at a desk and judging the work of others, which we do, we more importantly consult with those that are required to engage in the Section 106 process. So in this address, I'm going to go through and give a brief introduction of what we do in the Section 106 program area at the AHPP, why we do it, and how the archaeological record, including the records created by archaeologists, support our work and are in fact an essential component to the Section 106 process. I have a couple of case studies to highlight what I'm driving at. This speech has been running about 25 to 30 minutes, but believe me, it'll feel like 45, so you get a lot of bang for your buck. Then we're going to open things up for questions when I'm done. Love a little Q&A if we have a moment, so be thinking about that. So when we say Section 106, we're talking about that thrill ride that is the Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 as amended. Now, the National Historic Preservation Act has a lot of sections, 407 sections, and we can discuss any of those at another time, but right now we're just going to focus on Section 106, the darling of the National Historic Preservation Act. Now, the Act provides broad and important guidance, and it also provides inspiring and aspirational direction. It notes the importance of integrating our cultural foundations and history into our living communities, all things which I know the people viewing this are interested in. And wow, that's good stuff. That's real good stuff. And that's inspiring. And the Act also directs federal agencies to make haste and give maximum encouragement to agencies and individuals and to assist state and local governments. And that all drives at the underlying theme of this address that the work we do individually and in our organizations is a vital part of the aggregate that over time expands our understanding of the archaeological record and helps Section 106 function at its best. Of course, Section 106, meaning the law enacted by the legislature. And Section 106 also has regulations found in 36 CFR Part 800, and since 2014, found in Title 54 of the United States Code. Now, at its best, Section 106 can really be a lovely and collaborative process that promotes the consideration of views of all parties and the effects of federal projects on historic properties. It can consider the effects of those actions, and I argue that that consideration of effects is the fundamental mandate of the section. Also, there is an independent federal agency called the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation that provides guidance to SHPOs, to Congress, to the president, while promoting the preservation and productive use of historic resources in the United States. In my experience, the folks at the council, they do excellent work. They exhibit both broad and nuanced understanding of the regulations and the law. They're often gifted mediators and live up to what Ronald Reagan called the 9 most terrifying words in the English language. Some of you may know this. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And they really do help. And that is what we have endeavored to do at the HPP as well. So it's within this framework that we operate as a state agency fulfilling the mandate of federal law. And as I said, our primary purpose is to assist federal agencies and applicants meet their regulatory responsibilities. This we know, because Section 106 requires federal agencies to consider the effects of their actions on historic properties. The purpose is not wholly based in historic preservation. The purpose is to accommodate historic preservation concerns with the needs of federal agencies through consultation. This really encapsulates a very important feature of the regulations and how we should operate in accordance with those regulations to accommodate historic preservation concerns with the needs of federal agencies and to do so through consultation. However, important to note as well, just as agencies may consider the effects of their actions, they are also considering their own missions and they support their own missions. And those missions may not always align with ours. So, in accordance with our mission at the HPP to save the special places of Arkansas, it is my opinion we should seek as much benefit as we can within the constraints of the regulations, serving our mission, and advocate for avoidance, protection, or mitigation of effects to historic properties. We advocate for the consideration of all consulting parties with an interest in the project, or all parties that may be affected by a project, or possibly even affected by the position the Arkansas SHPO and may take in the opinions that we provide. Now, the SHPO is a position appointed by the governor, and the mandate for the creation of the office of the SHPO in the 59 states, territories, and the District of Columbia may be found in Section 101B of the National Historic Preservation Act for any of you flipping through your own copy at home. Uh, Fortunately, our work in Section 106 at the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program remains largely free of political machinations. So we're free to conduct our work and utilize the expertise that our personnel have and do our job effectively and unfettered by any tampering. So in Arkansas, the Office of the SHPO heads or leads the AHPP. There are several programs that reside under the AHPP. That's, say, National Register. We have certified local governments, federal programs dealing with grants and easements and technical assistance, education and outreach, special projects, Main Street, Arkansas. There's a lot going on in our agency. And if I can give another praise here, there are a lot of really many talented folks, knowledgeable and dedicated folks working in those areas. That's all money well spent. So they are there to help you if you need it. So I certainly encourage you to reach out to anyone at the HPP if they can provide you assistance. Now, on a few occasions, I'll warn you, I have a spotty record giving talks on Section 106. It can be a really dry subject. I have helped audience members catch up on lost sleep, have a little time to catch up on emails or texts. And part of that is because I thought, well, it would be a brilliant idea to discuss the definitions, because it's true that the definitions are very important to understanding Section 106 and communicating within the Section 106 process. They are, after all, stipulative definitions. It means they mean very specific things in the context of the regulations. For example, historic property, which I mentioned a few moments ago, in that federal agencies are required to consider the effects of their actions on historic properties. Well, a historic property, as you can see by definition in the regulations, means a resource that is eligible for or listed in the National Register of Historic Places. Now, this seems simple, but there is widespread misuse and misunderstanding of this term. Also, please note that the definition includes artifacts, records, and remains related to a property, which again plays to the subject of this talk. As well, included are properties of traditional, religious, or cultural importance to an Indian tribe, although a caveat, these properties must also meet the criteria for inclusion in the National Register. And as a quick aside, very important to the Section 106 process are National Register eligibility determinations. They're fundamental to the Section 106. We can only consider the effect of historic properties if we know, one, we have properties, we've identified cultural resources, period. And two, if those properties are significant, such as that they meet the definition of a historic property and or are eligible for listing in the National Register. Also, and notably in practice, a real kicker, for the purposes of Section 106, we may treat a property that is unevaluated for the National Register as if it is eligible until proven otherwise. So to summarize, something as basic as the definitions, which again, for those at home, is found in 36 CFR 800.16. Those definitions form the foundation on which consultation may proceed. So very important. If you want to know Section 106, start with the definitions. You heard it here first. So I mentioned that there are many sections within the National Historic Preservation Act. Section 110 is one of particular importance. You can chew on this for just a minute while I talk. It articulates with Section 106. It's pretty extensive. Section 110 is. It has some important provisions, whether fulfilled or not, and they feed into the larger regulatory framework. Importantly, agencies should assume responsibility for historic properties. So they should inventory and understand what properties are under their control. They should have a qualified leader for their historic preservation program. They should ensure proper management of historic properties and consult on preservation related issues. As with a lot of laws and regulations that don't carry penalties, there is a wide range of compliance and non-compliance with Section 110. But to the title of this talk, when we document the archaeological record, we become part of that record and play an important role in documenting our own history, others' history, and making history ourselves. I think these are surely things that everyone here understands. And while that may sound like a lot, it may sound overblown. I mean, making our own history, I think that's true. Really, yes. It's something as simple as a site form. We'll have other eyes upon it at some time. That work matters. That is often the work that most of us on our staff, federal agencies, tribal nations, that's the work we often see first. And certainly information from other types of investigations, whether it be a survey, monitoring, significance testing, or a full-blown data recovery project, those projects help us better understand an area. And it's tried to say, perhaps, but the more data, the better. Although I'd say implicit in that is the more good data, the better, because good data can't be negative data, but bad data, in my opinion, is not going to be good data. Seems simple enough. So again, as previously noted, we consult on the appropriate level of effort to identify historic properties. Field methods, we compare those methods that come to us against the state guidelines or standards stipulated in an agreement. However, it's not the role of the SHPO to mandate what defines an appropriate level of effort, but to consult and comment. It's diplomacy. Beyond that, we have no authority. That is our role in the process, and it's an important and vital role that helps keep the process moving. It keeps it functional, and at its best, does its job to consider the effects of federal actions on historic properties. And as I said already, again and again, the SHPO is a consulting party. And of course, there are other consulting parties as well. For example, historic district commissions, concerned citizens, and others with a role or interest in a federal action that has the potential to cause effects. This could include Arkansas Archaeological Survey Research Station archaeologists, and naturally, it could include the state archaeologists. And of course, federally recognized tribal nations are consulting parties in the Section 106 process. Our office currently counts 21 federally recognized tribes associated with the state. While there are some overlapping interests, tribes have specific concerns and specific histories, and they have data that may or may not be known or accessible to other consulting parties, including the SHPO. The process should be one of inclusion and certainly not one of exclusion. It is the responsibility of the federal agency to understand the interests of consulting parties. It is their responsibility to engage tribal nations in meaningful consultation. A wealth of opinions on a well-documented federal project holds the greatest promise for successful 106 consultation. So what our role as a consulting party does highlight is the fact that, again, we, the archaeologists in the Section 106 program area at the SHPO or the AHPP, Arkansas Historic Preservation Program, depend on the work of others to do our job. We depend on the work of professionals, non-professionals alike. Anyone that's had a hand in documenting cultural resources in Arkansas. We depend on the work of contract archaeologists, of course, that undertake field work and produce cultural resource reports. We also depend on tribal historic preservation staff and the relationships we build there. We depend on the work of local informants, concerned citizens, landowners, avocational archaeologists that document sites and complete site forms. Of course, we depend on the field work of reporting agencies. In fact and in practice, it is the data always that matters. Or better said, it is always the data that matters. And we access a number of sources and seek the same from agencies, applicants, and contract archaeologists. In these historic maps from the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, we can see that they're beautiful, they're interesting, and they're informative. They're also sad in these cases because they detail the division and forced movement of people. They also help inform our understanding of other consulting parties, the history of our state, and the complexity of 19th century policies and actions that affect the archaeological and historical record in Arkansas. Of course, investigations should also include larger scale maps of general land office maps. Gives us some insight into previous land use, ownership as well, and any infrastructure that may have been present at the time of the mapping. We look at ecological data at various regional scales, such as here we see there's a location within the Springfield Plateau, a subdivision of the Ozark Highlands. We look at geology. We look at soil. This is all information. It's part of the integration of disciplines, actors, and data that furthers our understanding in this Section 106 process and helps account for and consider effects to historic properties in Arkansas. So I thought it would be helpful to highlight a couple of archaeological data recovery projects in Arkansas and demonstrate how a project may proceed from initial documentation to testing to mitigation. Please note that I redacted and used a blur tool to remove locational data, just in the interest of prudence and especially because this information is not relevant to this discussion. I have no doubt that there are some of you that will recognize these sites, some of you that most likely worked on these sites. And I do mention it later, a little bit later in the talk, but with both of these case studies, I do want to say that we had a lot of excellent archaeologists working on these projects. And of course, that is largely to credit for the success of both of these data recovery projects. Also, I do have permission to use this information in this presentation. So what we're looking at here, we have a site. The initial documentation of the site dates from 1975, and then 39 years later, a proposed federally assisted project resulted in a phase 1 survey, which you see on the left of your screen. This confirmed the location of the site within the right-of-way and produced results that supported a recommendation for phase 2 testing to determine if the site meets National Register criteria. The discovery was one diagnostic projectile point knife, which you can see on the right of your screen. So subsequent phase 2 testing resulted in a recommendation that the site is eligible for inclusion in the National Register. So we have an eligible site. It's within the right-of-way of a planned federally assisted project. That resulted in the development of an MOA. Memorandum of Agreement that is outlined within those Section 106 regulations, how that process works. And the MOA governs the mitigation of adverse effect to the site by the proposed federal action. The advisory council that I mentioned earlier has an opportunity to participate. They may decline to participate. They may also be a signatory. They do have a role as a signatory in this process. There are also other possible invited signatories, such as, in this case, the federally recognized tribes. So there's a treatment plan that accompanies the MOA. In this instance, this plan provides detail and greater resolution to the mitigation strategy. In this case, broadly speaking, 25% of the excavation of Area B, that's the primary area of interest on this site, will be via hand excavation at 10-centimeter levels, followed by 75% excavation via mechanical means. And here we see the 25% of the units that were excavated by hand in red, and an adjoining map showing a color gradient for the closing base elevations for each unit. And so what does this all tell us? Well, more than we can cover here for sure. And I'm certainly giving a very cursory overview of these case studies with these data recovery projects. But we can still demonstrate that we learn a lot. This example, we had an ungulate tibia fragment pretty deep in the northwest part of the site. The fragment appeared non-archaeological and taken in context with other data indicates a fairly modern incursion to this part of the site. Again, telling us something. Similarly, we had a Dalton point excavated within the plow zone. That is indicating there have been other disturbances and possible movement of artifacts from one location to another. Also, though, the assemblage produced artifacts ranging from the Dalton in one way or another through the Archaic period, through the Archaic and into at least the late woodland. Notably in this graphic as well, we have a late woodland reed arrow point recovered from a depth greater than a late Archaic period LSPPK. Again, all possibly telling us things about natural and cultural transformations of the site, uh, even though perhaps we don't have an intact context for these examples. Also, what it does tell us is that when we do have intact had a strong middle to late Archaic collection, as noted with these two examples, a heavily resharpened Calf Creek PPK and a Castroville PPK from elevations that really made sense stratigraphically. So in another example, similar to what we just looked at, we have a phase 1 survey in advance of a federally assisted project. It's resulted in the documentation of the site and a recommendation for significance testing. Testing produced results that supported a recommendation the site, is eligible and resulted in phase 2 testing. Did I just say that? Sorry, let me. Testing produced results that supported a recommendation the site is eligible for the National Register. Yes, and that resulted in the development of an MOA. And this is taken from these hand excavation strategy percentages are taken from the treatment plan for this project, which was included in the MOA. So here, it's a much larger site, 10% slated for hand excavation, and the remaining 90% for mechanical stripping. So we'll take a moment here and we're looking at this 10%, and we see 30% slash 10%. So the initial 30%, we're doing 10% hand excavation overall. 30% of that 10%, those units provide coverage over the site. And so when you look at this map on the right, those large blocks, those fully realized blocks are 10 by 10 meters. So those are 10-meter blocks, and those units that you see, the dark squares, those are 2-meter units. So our initial 30% of the 10% total that we're going to hand excavate provided coverage of the site. And then the additional 70% of that 10% that we were going to fully excavate by hand, that's propulsive sampling based on the results from our initial excavation. So we're hitting the most productive areas, the areas where we could gain the most insight, and areas where we could recover data sufficient to answer the research questions that we have built into the memorandum memorandum of agreement and treatment plan. Also, concurrent with the mechanical stripping, we excavate to bedrock. In this example, you can see on the right for geomorphological analysis. And that's what on the left, what's a post profile view of post mechanical stripping looks like. And here as well, we had a particularly well represented Middle Archaic collection in good context, really excellent context, but also an artifact assemblage that indicated thousands of years of human presence on the site, ranging from the Dalton to the woodland. So to summarize the point of this story, we looked at those case studies to illustrate how it is the aggregation of data that best supports an effective and efficient Section 106 process. In the first site, we had a documentation from 1975, and then many years later, a subsequent formal investigation that confirmed the site's presence still and the integrity within the right-of-way for this proposed project, or the proposed right-of-way, I should say, then a recommendation for further testing, and then, of course, determination that that site is eligible, and therefore through the memorandum of agreement process to full data recovery, which is what we constituted as mitigation of adverse effect to that site resulting from the construction project. So it's data that supports the federal agency's position that their work will not affect historic properties. And that's what we're always asking. We're asking for federal agencies to make their argument, to present us with the information when they're seeking our concurrence so that we can be fully armed from that perspective on their position and the reasons for supporting their position. And that as well allows us to provide our concurrence or non-concurrence, or make further recommendations that and remain confident in those findings that we are making in our agency. Now, I should say, working in the Section 106 program, I think it has a reputation among some as being soul crushing and dispiriting. A lot of SHPO archaeologists or Section 106 reviewers may be grumpy. There's this unrelenting workload. We review thousands of projects a year, largely with a 30-day deadline as mandated by the regulations. A lot of states are understaffed in sections. There's one state, a very large state with a lot of archaeology that I can think of that has one archaeologist covering the entire state. We're very fortunate in our program that we are very well staffed and well supported in that respect. And most importantly, though, yeah, it can be a little dispiriting sometimes, but it's important work. And it's a genuine opportunity to do good and make the world a better place. It's an opportunity to advocate for tribal nations, communities, citizens concerned about local cemeteries, which we see a lot, folks concerned about effects to their historic homes, among many others. The job requires an even handed approach, it requires patience, hopefully rigor, and in accordance with our mission as an agency, operation within the constraints of the regulations to consider effects and protect the special places of Arkansas. Now, I can only speak from the perspective of the SHPO and as a staff member that works under the State Historic Preservation Officer. I should note that the relationship between the SHPO and other consulting parties is very important. Our office welcomes consultation with other interested parties, and we have regularly sought their opinion. Conversely, we're open to providing what insight and counsel we have to offer. Again, that's part of what we do. At present, our program at the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program is fresh, it's dynamic, and I'm confident it's equipped to do the work of the people and fulfill our role to advocate for historic preservation concerns and support the mission of the agency. I really do expect great things moving forward. Now, one thing, a little personal note, uh, I had my first ever college class with Dr. Jerry Rose. It was an honors physical anthropology class in 1988. That just happened to be my first college class ever since it was on a Monday morning. Regardless, it was that class, Dr. Rose's class, that first fired my interest in anthropology. I was out of school for 13 years before I returned and to finish my BA at the age of 34. I then continued to get my MA and have been really fortunate in my career path in this field in Arkansas over the last nearly 16 years. My point is that A, you are listening to this because you have an interest or a love for archaeology. Uh, so if there are goals as yet unmet, we're all really blessed to live in a state rich in archaeology and rich in archaeologists. There are world-class archaeologists throughout the state at survey research stations. There are academics with wide-ranging experience, and there are schools themselves with dedicated archaeology programs or an anthropology program or hybrid graduate program. There are a lot of resources in Arkansas, and there are a lot of helpful people. And you know enough to avail yourself of this opportunity. So, regardless of your age or your current level of education, this is a wonderful field. It's really interesting stuff, and it's worth pursuing to whatever end you desire, either avocationally or professionally. So when you contribute to the record, your work becomes part of that record. It is your legacy and the archaeological legacy you leave behind. And one last reminder, we always want to stress this, excuse me, please operate ethically. Be mindful of best practices and remain aware of personal property rights, state and federal laws that protect cultural resources. I hope that you continue to take advantage of all the state has to offer and grow in your love and skill in archaeology. Teamwork makes the dream work, and thanks for your support of such a cool organization as the Arkansas Archaeological Society that stands for, quote, recognition and preservation of our cultural heritage and prehistory, and also fosters and encourages the public interest in the preservation of the past. You know, our missions between the HPP and the Arkansas Archaeological Society are very similar. And I want to encourage as much cooperation and coordination as possible to help attain our shared goals. Please keep up the good work. Now, I know we have just a few minutes left, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. I don't know what the scheduling is like. Again, I'm glad that we got in and we're able to get this in before 8 o'clock. So I hope you enjoyed visiting. I do want to say there are no stupid questions, but I cannot make the same promise for the answers. So I am available. if anyone has anything to ask.
Okay, well, thank you, Eric. And that was very enlightening. A lot of us need to know more about what 106 is, and that was informative. Does anyone have a question for Eric?
I'll ask you a question, Eric, from your personal experience. So,
Yes.
just background wise, I worked for the last 8 years for the Center of Environmental Management of Military Lands. So
Oh,
I've
yeah.
been doing Section 106 archaeology out of the Fort Wainwright office in Alaska full time for some period of time now. I
Outstanding.
love the Section 106 process. Everything you're saying is really cool. I'm excited to get involved in this process here in the state. But I wanted to ask you about your favorite sort of like creative mitigation. Like a lot of people think Section 106 is like really cut and dry, but I know there's some real flexibility in there. So what have you like enjoyed being able to produce from these projects?
That's a really good point, and something maybe given a little more time I would have discussed. But yes, creative mitigation is very exciting. And so we discussed data recovery, two standard mitigation measure as a standard mitigation measure for archaeological resources. But there are a lot of creative options that may arguably provide longer lasting and better benefit to the public. As we know, there is an issue with archaeology. We want it to be public and understood and appreciated and supported by the public, but we protect archaeological data. So, how to interface between the public and the archaeology, it's a tall order sometimes. One mitigation that comes to mind right now, I had a few case studies I thought considered discussing, and this one isn't archaeological, but it's particularly powerful. I think we have a small town in Arkansas. There's a cell tower. The proposal was to put it up within the visual area of potential effects, or the view shed of a commercial historic district. So there was an adverse effect finding. We concurred with the finding of adverse effect to this historic district, which is listed in the National Register. And through development of an MOA, we discussed this with the mayor and with the council and with the museum staff there in the town. We developed a plan to undertake some pre-construction additional photographic documentation of the downtown area, and to work with the local university program to gather oral historical data of folks that have lived in the city for years, that use these buildings, that own businesses in these buildings, that have long histories with this town and with what is now the commercial historic district. Similarly, similarly in that it's another FCC project outside of a national park in Arkansas. And again, both of these are still either in the negotiation stages or haven't been fully executed. So I don't want to discuss them necessarily too openly right now. But it's a cell tower project. Again, there was a determination of adverse effect to this national park, or to the national battlefield, I should say. And one there was a lowering of the tower height. That's one mitigative measure. They did a helicopter test, a series of tests to check the visibility from this new height from different points in the park. And ultimately, we're hoping that the mitigation for this project will result in some funding to support the acquisition of additional property, which will help bolster the buffer around the park. So that's a one. Those are a couple of creative measures. They're a little bit outside the box, and really a lot of SCC projects, just because of the prevalence of tower construction. And now we're seeing a lot of smaller 5G small cell construction, 35, 40 feet high, not as generally as big of a deal with regard to effects to historic properties, but certainly macro cell from 200, 250, 300, 350 feet. You have real potential to affect view sheds. So particularly from a historic battlefield, you can see how that may happen. And also from a commercial historic district in a small Arkansas town.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks.
Hey, thank you, Joshua.
Other questions?
I have a question. Since we're in a society meeting here, what do you think? How do you think? How do you think that that non-professionals can help the 106 process best?
Best. Well, I think being an advocate, I think there are a lot of ways really, but advocating, we see a lot of contacts from individuals that are concerned about properties within their domain, so within their town or their neighborhood or their county. A lot of times these are cemeteries. These would be unregistered cemeteries. There's one, for instance, in Saline County in Benton, the Hughes Cemetery. It's listed in the Arkansas Register. It is documented as an archaeological site. It is presently suffering damage and has for quite a while. I mean, really a long period of time, intermittently at least, from vandals, from people riding four wheelers and other vehicles through the cemetery, damaging stones, displacing stones. These are potentially charged violations that could carry felony offenses in Arkansas. Um, we have a concerned citizen, a very active and committed person that wants to possibly purchase the land or at least be designated as a custodian, um, so that he can properly manage the property and protect it. The city's been helpful in building a new gate for the cemetery, but the issue is that we still don't know who actually owns the property, and we've tried on our end due diligence, looking at deeds, reading legal descriptions, trying to pinpoint the language in the deed and the description that would confirm that transfer of that property. In these instances, where there are two deeds that we've looked at, transfer from private to the city. So my inclination is the city owns this, but the police report that they are constrained because they do not have an owner and therefore they cannot assign a victim. This is coming to me secondhand. I haven't spoken directly with the police about this, but it's just a quick summary of where we are in this project. So, uh, can advocate, can be involved. You can work with the city, you can work with the county, you can contact us, and we will provide what assistance we can. So, remaining vigilant, remaining dedicated when you participate in projects with the Archaeological Survey. And you have an opportunity to contribute to the archaeological record, whether it be in a report or a site form. Uh, Remember that that is information that someone's going to look at some point, and it's easy to think maybe that, oh, once it goes in the record, it's often lost. But we look at a lot of site forms, and I've done a lot of site forms, and I've got colleagues that have done a whole lot of site forms, a lot more than me, and a whole lot more than me, as a matter of fact. And we want to make sure that that's our best work and that we're putting our best foot forward. And I can think. Uh, that of one site form in particular, I just have a misspelling in it, but I need to go back. I want to go back and correct that so that doesn't outlive me. Um, again, being involved in the community, being involved in the society, and feeling free to reach out and contact us. And I'm going to speak for the survey and our survey archaeologists. Sometimes we will help connect folks with their regional survey archaeologists, because those are folks that are often best equipped and the most knowledgeable subject matter experts, especially for those regions that they cover. I think those are a few ways, Mary Beth, that they can make a contribution. And sort of the overlying or underlying theme of this was that all that information is important. It's important to us. It's something that we use every day in order to do the work that we're charged to do. I was hoping for the question, what is Section 107? But it's I'll tell you, it's the exclusion from the provisions of the National Historic Preservation Act for the White House, Capitol, and Supreme Court. So just FYI, I can look them all up here. I've got them all.
Is that a mural of Petra behind you?
It is Petra. This is, again, I didn't even mention that I'm joining you from the ancient Nabatean city, annexed by the Romans later, as it entered its decline. Uh, Petra, this is a photo I took. I was very fortunate. Again, talking about opportunities. Well, nobody like me. I got to go to Jordan with Dr. Rose for a season. Absolutely. Obviously, he's a rock star. Fabulous work, wonderful country, beautiful people. And I got lucky to get out to Petra in the morning. You can't really see, but there were no people. I emerged from the Seek and it was empty. And Dr. Rose, I remember he said, if you get out there and there are no people, you better get a shot because it's not going to be that way again. And
Eric, what year did you go?
2006, the Nadi Latvia.
No, that was 8 years after me. So
Well,
I can't say enough. Again, it just drives home the point that there are wonderful opportunities in Arkansas. And, it's a great place to avail yourself of those opportunities in archaeology.